Okay, so here we are, we see the C scale. And the one chord, remember the C major triad that's built in thirds, beginning on the note C. This is our one chord in the key of C. Now we're going to build that 4 chord on the 4th scale degree, 1, 2, 3, 4, this note here, which is an F. So now I'm going to take my pinky, place it here, stack those notes in thirds. There is my F major triad, or F chord, in the key of C. And if I just step up one note higher, and again stack these notes in thirds, that gives me the 5 chord in the key of C, which is the G major chord. So again, your primary chords starting with C major, followed by F major and G major. The 1, 4, and 5 chord. Now that simple melody, it's probably familiar to you. The little diagram within the blog post sounds like this. So there you go, that very simple melody in the key of C. As you remember, I said that the C major chord would work well really over every bar except for the second to last, because the note C, which we keep coming back to within this melody, is obviously a part of the C major chord. So I'm going to have to put my phone down just for a second and play you the C major chord with my left hand and the melody in the right hand to show you what I mean. So here we are. There's the C chord, the F chord, and the G chord. And I'll play the melody with my right hand. So this first example is just me playing the C chord with my left hand and only changing the C chord to the F chord when I get to that second to the last measure to match up with that A melody note. So here we go, the first example. Here's the F chord. And back to the C chord. Okay? So now the second way that I'm going to play it is the example that I gave you that I actually harmonized, where I'm looking for common tones more frequently. So for example, that first measure, if you look back at the diagram, begins on the C note, but then it moves to the D. Well, if you think about the 3 primary chords, you'll remember that the G major chord has a D in it, so that G chord would work very nicely over the D melody note. So I'm going to harmonize that D note with a G chord every time that I see it. And so essentially what I'm doing is alternating between the C and G over and over again when the notes are matching up properly and there are notes in common between the melody and the harmony there. And then changing to that F chord at the second to last measure. So here's what it sounds like. Second harmonization. So now what I'm going to do is actually play the second harmonization, where I include more of the primary chords other than just the C and the F. I also include the G major chord. If you notice, that first measure of the snippet of the melody begins on a C, but the very next note is a D. And think back to your primary chords. The D is not in the C or the F chord, but it is in the G major chord. So every time I see a D in the melody, I'm going to choose to harmonize that with a the G major chord. So now I'm using all three primary chords in this piece, and it makes the music a little more interesting. So here's the second example. So you see there at the end as well, the second to last measure, instead of just using the F, which I could have done and it sounded just fine, I chose to move from the F back to the G chord because the D note is in the G chord. So again, we're looking for notes in common. I'm going to keep coming back to that. Notes in common between the melody and the harmony. That's kind of the secret sauce in terms of matching up harmony and melody. Now, I could make this a little more interesting if I chose to break the chord up as opposed to just blocking it like this. I'll give you a little extra tidbit here in this video. So instead of blocking the chord like so, I could choose to break this up. Alternate between the first, the last, and back to the first, or I could use this sort of pattern where I go to the outside notes first and end on that first note. And I could do that with the F chord and the G chord and then back to the C chord like this. Okay, and if you really want to make your music even more interesting, you could do a combination of the two. Like so. Okay? Now music's all about patterns, right? You could also look for different ways to voice this same chord. For example, and I'm not going to get too technical here, I'm not going to mention any technical words because there are words that exist for what I'm about to do, but sometimes it's just easier to see it and then learn the name of whatever it is you're doing, whatever technique you're choosing to use. So here's the C chord, right? What happens if I take that C and I throw it up here on the top? There's a different voicing of those same three notes. All right, what about the F chord? Here's the F chord. Okay, what if I took this C and put it on the bottom and kept the other two notes the same? I still have the F, A, and the C. It's just a different voicing. And what about that 5 chord? Well, isn't this the 5 chord? It is, because this D, which I would typically see up here in the triad, is now on the bottom. Now it gives me a few different options or ways to play these notes, which in all honesty will make your music sound more interesting. So now what I'm going to do is play the same snippet of the melody a couple of different ways by using different patterns and different arrangements of those same 3 notes. Now it's the same 3 primary chords, just a little different way to look at playing. Again, a little different arrangement of the notes at times, and then also using different patterns. Here's the melody and the harmony together. Go. So that's one example. Let me show you one more example where I actually start on a different arrangement or a different configuration of the C chord. So instead of starting on the root of that chord, the C, I'm going to begin on the G. Let's see what happens. Add some pedal this time.